Welcome back, sisters. You're tuned in to Women's AM. I'm your host, Hassana, and today I'm joined by sisters Nusrat, Liz, and our special guest today, Sister Adama. Alhamdulillah, it's great to see you sisters here, and we've got such an interesting discussion on the table today. We're going to be talking about Africa and Islam, but before we kind of dip into that, I'm interested to find out how you kind of started to look into this subject, because it's not one that many people often kind of, kind of are interested in, perhaps.
Well, I'm actually a history student, so I have always had a great interest in history, specifically to do with slavery, to do with African American history. I studied a bit of that at university. So coming from a very sort of dual identity kind of framework, I wanted to see how did that actually merge together. And actually when I started to look into history of my ethnic background and my sort of regional background, I found that there's so much to learn about how Islam has influenced and shaped African societies, culture and peoples. So it was kind of like a natural progression. I've always been a sort of history fanatic, so it was quite interesting for me to learn about this.
Well, I'm really excited to actually start this discussion, and it's great to meet our guest there. I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting discussion. Without further ado, let's go straight to her views, where today we're exploring the relationship between Islam and Africa. And of course, don't forget, you can join in our discussion by calling in. The numbers are going to be appearing on your screens throughout this segment. You can also join in via Twitter using the hashtag WAM15. The history of Islamic civilization spans cultures and generations over time and space. Africa is specifically renowned for its relationship with the growth of Islam through its contribution to Islamic knowledge and famous personalities dating back from the early Muslim community. With such a rich history, many of us know surprisingly very little about this important subject. So let's delve into our discussion. Sister Adama, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, we know that Africa and Islam have kind of a link which is integral in the history of Islam. Can you give us a summary of how Islam first came to Africa?
So I'd like to start with the term Africa. Africa, or an African identity, is actually, in some sense, a kind of modern construct. So we have a lot of nation states. What you found during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a whole load of territories. Tribalism helped to shape society. It was very central to that. And you had also a number of different empires as well within the last millennium as well. So it's very important to understand Africa in those terms. However, during the discussion, we'll be talking about certain countries that made up certain aspects of pre-colonial Africa. So I think that's something to take into a great deal of consideration. But when you look at certain regions of Africa, whether you're looking at North Africa, East Africa, South Africa, they have different kind of they had trade and economy and commerce as a very important sort of interactive starting point between Arabs and Africans. Arabs and Africans have been old trading partners for a very long time. So if you look at East Africa, for example, you had Somalia and Kenya and Ethiopia that had very sort of strong trading links with Yemen, for example. And this was something that was known by a lot of our forerunning Muslim historians. So in the 10th century, al-Mas'udi, he noted that there was some very strong trade links between the Persian Gulf, India and China, and some countries in Africa as well. And Ibn Battuta, who was our 14th century medieval scholar as well, he was a Moroccan traveller. So he noted that there were a lot of ulama from the Shafi'i fiqh school that were in these kind of areas as well. In West Africa specifically, you had people such as the Fulanis, who were known to be nomadic travelers, and they helped to spread Islam during some conquests that occurred as well. There was the geographer al-Zuhri, who noted that the people of Ghana in 1076 had converted to Islam through the presence of a group of people called the Almoravids, and they were a Berber community who started a movement to try to grapple with some of the kind of un-Islamic rituals that had occurred in some places in the Maghreb region. So that kind of spread kind of westwards as well. And there were a number of different empires that have been noted by people like Andalusian geographer Al-Bakri, such as the Gao, Ghana and Takrur empires as well, and how merchants interacted with West African kings.
So we talk a lot about this kind of relationship in terms of trade and things like that, and that's perhaps how it started. But can we say that there is a special relationship between Africa and Islam, Sister Liz?
You know, I find this, for me, the term special relationship, I find a little bit problematic. So I'd rather kind of sort of break it down and say, what can we learn about this? You know, what does this tell us about Islam? What does it tell us about history, Islamic history? What does it tell us about the Arabs as a people? Now, we know that when Islam came into Africa, it came in both from the east and the north. So it went over the ocean, it went over the Sahara Desert, you know, two areas that are kind of viewed as inaccessible and difficult. And I think from this we kind of really see, firstly, the robustness of the message that they were taking, and secondly, you know, the robustness of the people and the determination of the people. And we see there's a very, you know, when we see the way Muslims were kind of deployed, and this was during the caliphate of Umar radiallahu anh, and we see how, you know, Muslims were deployed to convey this message. And they were very, very single-minded, and they were very, very determined. And I think this tells us a lot about Islam. It tells us a lot about the message. And I think that's the special thing. But I think in terms of the relationship, I know, you know, for me when I was looking into it, particularly I was interested in Algeria. My husband's from Algeria. And I think kind of looking at a country, it seems like Islam was always there. You know, you can't imagine anything, you know, anything else. And you see how it's become such an integral part of their identity. But actually we see that it was not until the 12th century that the kind of people in like Algeria, Tunisia and in North Africa that they actually started to accept Islam. And this was actually with it the Arab rule. So this was a kind of colonisation, if you like. And if you look at more recent history and the French, you know, attempting to colonise Algeria and how differently they reacted to it, again, to me, subhanAllah, I just thought it was amazing to kind of see the stark contrast of those two, you know, those two historical events. And also it kind of made me think about how we think of reverts, because you read a lot in African history about African reverts, and these were kind of the earliest reverts, you know, in sort of North Africa and various places. And it did make me think a lot about, you know, the identity of the country, the identity of reverts, and kind of how that's portrayed.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting that you touched on the different parts of Africa there. You know, that we have the North Africa and we have West Africa, and the different ways that Islam kind of came to that continent. I mean, Sister Nusrat, Sister Liz touched on some really interesting aspects there of the kind of special relationship. And of course, we know that women had a great deal and a great part to play in this as well, because, you know, there were female African scholars, and we'll touch on that later on, I believe. But, you know, there's so much happening, you know, from the start, really, of when Islam came. Can you tell us a little bit more about this kind of special relationship?
This special relationship actually can even be seen impacting within not only East Africa, but even where I'm from, Uganda. I'm of Omani and Ugandan descent, and even when I look at how Islam came, it made me realise that this special relationship, the spread of Islam, was initially the main message to actually spread Islam, and they worked tirelessly. We see this in terms of language, the impact that Arabic had on the Swahili language, where it's a mixture of Bantu lexicons and Arabic. And today we find it particularly among the coastal areas of East Africa. So within Tanzania we have Pemba, Zanzibar, off the coast we even have with Kenya, Lamu and Mombasa. So this language enabled us to actually not only understand the Quran, but even have that kind of identity. It forms our identity. So Swahili is widely spoken around the world, with people, I think it's with estimates of the total number of either 60 to 150 million people, and the impact that Swahili culture has and the language has upon East Africa in even conveying Islam has been helpful in terms of missionary work. So in terms of work to do with spreading the dawah. It's enhanced religious spirituality as well, because we find that within Sufism as well, the coast are very in touch with that Sufi aspect. Particularly the Qadiriya Sufi order. It's enhanced language, ability to give dawah and culture. In Oman today, we find older generation Omanis and even younger generation Omanis speaking Swahili, so they're realising those trade links and that religious link that there is. And it's also contributed towards scholarship. We find East Africans actually contributing towards scholarship. The Islamic University in Mbale, Uganda, is one of the hubs for scholarships from people all over to actually come and learn about Islam. So this special relationship is something that not only can be seen at the inception of Islam spreading within East Africa, but we can find its effects today. Obviously, I wouldn't be, because of that effect, I wouldn't be sitting here telling the tale. So, yeah.
Really, really interesting stuff there, and I wish we didn't have to go to a break, but unfortunately we do have to take a quick break now, but stay where you are. We'll be coming back to this discussion in a few minutes, inshallah. Before that, here's this week's competition.